Hi, everyone. This is Amanda Hsieh. I'm your co-host today for the ESG Decoded podcast. I'm excited to have Arquella Hargrove with me as my guest today. She is the Chief Culture Officer at Alchemy Consulting Group, partnering with business leaders to build stronger, more effective teams and companies. Arquella is one of Houston's most influential women, named by DeMars Magazine. And if you're familiar, if she sounds familiar or looks familiar, it's probably because you've seen her either on the CW 39 morning show, the Fox 26 nightcap show, or maybe at the University of Houston or University of Houston downtown, where she is an adjunct professor. Arquella, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm happy to be here.
Will you tell us a little bit about Alchemy and a little bit about yourself? I gave a brief background, but there's so much more to you and so many more awards and recognitions.
Well, thank you again, Amanda. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation. Again, my name is Arquella Hargrove, and I am, again, the Chief Culture Officer at Alchemy Consulting Group. And we work and partner with organizations to approach or to facilitate the transformation of their leaders and their teams, which result in enhanced people-centric outcomes and improved profitability, as well as increased productivity for their employees. And they achieve this through transformation through a range of various strategies, whether it is leadership development, executive coaching, diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting, or HR consulting, to name a few, which again helps with engagement, retention, communication, inclusion, and many other successful outcomes for our client groups. And my background is in human resources management. Been doing it for about 30 years. I tell people I started when I was 12 and have do many things as relates to HR strategy, coaching, leadership development, and facilitating those important conversations around DEI as well as other leadership topics.
Aquila, I wanted to talk with you today about inclusive leadership and learn from what you're seeing out in the field as far as, um, it's always evolving. I think like ESG, I think like sustainability, it's always evolving. Love to hear from you, some of the things that you're seeing. But before we get into that, maybe we can just talk about, what is inclusive leadership a little bit. So just to make sure everyone understands that. Um, my I love to hear your perspective. One thing I think about today is to be a modern leader, a leader in today's world. I think you have to be an inclusive leader, but I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts about all this.
Yeah, definitely. So we talk about diversity initiatives, which a lot of times focuses on numbers or representation. However, we really, again, want to focus, we can't have one without the other, of course, but we want to focus on true inclusivity around leadership. And that is those embracing those different perspectives, as well as being able to be a leader that understands cultural differences and how to embrace that, as well as a leader who's curious and open to learning more and open-minded to the different viewpoints and perspectives, as well as collaborative. Being a leader who is inclusive means that you're collaborative and that you're empowering your team members to do stretch assignments, to be able to have their voices heard, and as that leader being able to work through any conflicts or differences so everyone is thriving within the organization. In addition to being that inclusive leader, it also requires that leader to really, again, be mindful of their own biases and being able to mitigate those biases or manage those biases so they are making the appropriate decisions as it relates to their employees and work assignments and hiring. And so those are some of the characteristics of an inclusive leader, as well as being respectful and having empathy and being trustworthy. And I can go on with many other characteristics, but those are some that really stand out when we think about being an inclusive leader and what we train leaders around and how they can show up for their team members, as well as, again, the benefits when you are more inclusive within an organization.
I think it's something that I like personally strive for, but it's a lot. And I would love to hear maybe more on the kind of practical side of things of like, what are the, I think we want, that's the vision, right? That's what we want to be. And how do we get there from where we are today?
Yeah, definitely. One of the research Amanda, shows and tells us, and we see it on this side as well, is that inclusive leadership really does improve collaboration within teams as well as innovation and employee satisfaction. And so really as we work with the leaders on this side, it's training on what does it look like, what does it sound like to be an inclusive leader and providing the how to that. And it really is that self-awareness, understanding, who you are as an individual and as a leader, and then what are things that you can do. And I always say start just in those small incremental steps of, how do I communicate better, making sure that I'm communicating in a way where I'm meeting people where they are. I'm practicing the platinum rule, treat people like they want to be treated. And so being able to communicate effectively and efficiently is key. Being able just to make sure you're hearing all the different voices and opinions as well when we're in meetings. And if someone's not speaking up or not, uh, you know, saying much, it's how do we bring that person in and ensure that they're being inclusive or being included. And then also just being curious and reaching out to your team members and asking more about who they are as they are members of the team and getting to know them a little bit better and being able to understand what motivates them, what are their aspirations, where do they see themselves growing within the organization, how do they need your help as a leader. So those are some of the things that we teach leaders on what they can do, and just really easy simple steps to practice inclusion every day. But it definitely starts with being aware of your own areas and what you do well, what areas you might need to improve on or develop. And then from there, what's the plan to implement these strategies where you can start to show up as that inclusive leader every day for your people.
How are you? I will. You've been in this space for a long time, and I want to understand, like, how are you? What, what are you seeing change? How are you seeing it evolved? ESG is always evolving and changing, and we understand the world better. I think with each year, we understand our impacts in the world. But I would love to hear from you as a practitioner, as an ex. What are you seeing? What are the trends that you're seeing, and how is it evolving?
When we think about, the traditional leadership models, and inclusive leadership really prioritizes building those relationships and understanding those individual strengths. And so seeing a lot more focus around how do we build those relationships? How do we make sure that people are leaning into their strengths? How do we ensure that there's psychological safety as well? Because what's trending is there's really being mindful of people's mental health states and making sure that they feel safe within the work environment where there's no bullying, there's no issues going on. And that goes to the leader to ensure that those things are happening within the organization, that where people feel safe and they are having those frequent touch points with their employees. But even, outside of COVID now, it's caused us to be really more intentional around how we communicate, what we communicate, and just being mindful of language. So those are some of the things that we're really seeing on this side as it relates to, again, building more relationships. It's being able to ensure employees are leaning into their strengths, as well as, again, being able to ensure that there's psychological safety there for employees. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing on this side, where we're having those conversations with leaders around inclusive leadership and how it might be different from the traditional models.
Something that I think about in at ClimeCo, at least, we have, I think, all we have, I think, currently 4 generations right alive right now in 2023, and we have all 4 generations, people from all around the world working here. And I think about how do we all want to bring ourselves to work, be ourselves at work, and I think about how can we, like you said, kind of create that space so that people can be themselves.
Yeah, it's really just to understand those people more, our team members more. And so, I like to tell leaders is to spend some time, get time on the calendar. And as you have new employees come in, and part of the onboarding process should be really around understanding them a little bit more. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, just asking those questions about, again, want to understand them more and their backgrounds and what genius are they bringing to the organization, and how that leader can support them. What are things that they want to do or see as that employee? What are things that might be? I have leaders too that may ask employees, what are some things that, if you get stuck or there's a trigger, what are things that I can do to support you? And so those are things that we, definitely encourage leaders to have those conversations around. And definitely we do. We have employees from 18 to 80 work in all different communication styles, all different ways of showing up and, work ethic. And so want to be able to understand that. And then how do you lead based on that person's generation? And again, what are they expecting? A lot of times the younger generation, and I'll say all people, want more frequent feedback. How do you get more frequent feedback? How do you coach in those certain situations? And so really, again, how do we make sure that we're transforming our organizations to meet the needs of our current workforce, and which may be totally different from what we're used to from years ago.
I remember when we were doing our talking before, one thing that you're very supportive is coaching our leaders, that giving our leaders the resources. I'd love to hear more about why the importance of that.
I am a fan of coaching. I'm a coach. I have a coach. And so when we coach, it really provides this personalized guidance to help those leaders or those teams to develop, in this case, inclusive leadership skills, or just to enhance their own leadership skills or interpersonal communication skills, and just really helping that leader to be their best at leading people and functions and companies. And so definitely there's benefits to coaching. I always like to say that coaching is there to help. We already know what we need to do, but that coach is there to help pull it out of us and to ensure that we are on track with our planning. And the coach is there to challenge. The coach is there to be the cheerleader. The coach is there to nudge as necessary, as well as to be that strategic thought partner as well. And so there are definitely benefits to having a coach. I always say that those who are in a director or above role definitely should consider having a coach, because then when you get to that level, there are just different conversations you're having and need that support. There are different rooms that you're in, and that coach is going to be able to help you to navigate those conversations in those rooms, as well as, I have leaders that I coach who will reach out and go, hey, I'm getting ready for a strategic planning session. I need to, need some guidance in regards to how do I, my agenda, and how do I show up, and what do I need to talk, my talking points. And so we work through that to get them prepared for those conversations, as I mentioned. And so coaching is a benefit for sure. There is a study right now that says that companies receive a return on investment through coaching at 786%. It's like, oh my gosh, like there are so many benefits when coaching is part of the strategy, because we're seeing it, and it's a return on investment for those companies that make that investment for those leaders. And then too, if there's someone who's not at a leadership level, there's typically group coaching that's beneficial as well. So those are some things to definitely for people to consider.
I have kind of a basic question here, but I wanted to make sure I understand. Is is your coach also your mentor, also your manager, or is it perhaps more beneficial, effective to have different people serve those roles? Or how do you see those roles, I guess, overlap? Or when is it, what's the most efficient, effective way to?
Yeah, definitely there's different roles. So the coach really is someone that should be totally separate from the internal manager. The manager is there to manage, ensure that the employee is meeting productivity levels and moving towards whatever the desired outcomes are for the business. And the manager will do some coaching and as relates to performance and behavior. However, a leadership coach or an executive coach typically is someone who's external to the organization, who is there to be that, as I mentioned, that strategic thought level leader, to help that leader to build awareness, to help with their communication skills, to be able, again, to provide that guidance into their development, which they're not going to be able to get as a result of someone being internal. Now, there are companies that do have internal coaches that work with their leaders. Again, they are typically focused on moving that leader forward in their performance and in their mindset as well. A mentor is someone who's there just as a someone as a to give guidance as far as their career goals and aspirations, and being able to answer any questions because they're possibly at that leadership level that mentee wants to be at, and so they can reach out to their mentor at any time and just seek out guidance, or be able to get introduced to people as well through the network. And so the mentoring is more of this person who is a guidance, I don't say guidance counselor, but just someone that provides guidance, and it's not compensated, whereas the coach typically is compensated for their services. And then there's a third level. It's a sponsor, and so sometimes people are leaders at more high level where they want to move into a C-suite role or more senior level role. They might have a sponsor who is someone internal to the organization, who is a much senior level, who's advocating for them to move into a much higher senior level role, and they're able to speak their names in those rooms maybe that they don't have access to. And so that may be the role of a sponsor.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's really helpful to think about this kind of team that one may want to build around them. Um, Something else that I've been noticing that's kind of changing in this DEI space is the specific calling out of belonging, the sense of feeling, this the feeling of belonging, the sense of being inclusive. Would love to hear your thoughts about that, about adding DEIB, and why, kind of the importance of specifically calling it out, and any thoughts about it.
Yeah, definitely. I always, tell clients who are on the DEI journey, and some of them still refer to it as diversity and inclusion because they're not ready to add the E for equity, or they are not sure when they want to add the B for belonging. And so for me, I always advise clients, and the team advises that when you are ready at that point, you add based on the strategy and how you are going on your journey. And so if you all want to focus on diversity and inclusion, make sure you're getting that right at some point. And then you want to really focus on how do we become a more equitable organization. Then it's including the E. And then when you want to look at how do we ensure that we are providing that sense of belonging, as well as, which is hand in hand with inclusion, to our strategy. At that point, I tell leaders, you want to add that. And so for me, that sense of belonging is people show up and say, you know what, I belong on the team, I belong at the company, based on the actions that they see, how they are embraced within their teams, the core values of the organization. And then two, ultimately it goes back to the strategy. What is that DEI or DEIB strategy, where again employees can say, I'm experiencing this belonging. And so those are things that I always recommend to clients when we're working with them on their strategy is, once you're ready, definitely you want to add it, but then what are those things that are going to ensure that employees know that they can see it and feel it by being a part of this culture. We have another client that it's DEIA, accessibility. And so meaning again, they're really focused around ensuring that their employees have access, whether it's access to opportunities, access as it relates to their abilities, access to uh, hiring or promotion or training. And so that's their focus. They don't have the B, they have the A. And so again, it's based on where you are in your journey, where it makes sense to continue to add as it relates to the overall strategy and what employees are asking for and what our employees are expecting as well. That plays a part too.
Arquella, what questions are company leaders asking you about this space that we haven't already discussed? What are the other kind of things that be, without naming any names or getting any specifics, of course, but what are the big topics that other folks are asking about that we should be aware of?
I think it's just being aware that it's still important to really focus on how do we continue to ensure that our employees are thriving and feeling that they have that they feel included, they feel that sense of belonging, they feel there's equity there in spite of, again, what's going on within our society where people are attacking DEI. And a lot of times I tell people I believe that's happening because there's not a true understanding of what it is. And of course, with the recent ruling by the Supreme Court related to the college admissions, that does not give companies a pass to go, okay, we're going to do away with DEI. That's not what that means. And so, really, how do we lean in to ensure that we are continuing to make sure that our workforces are diverse? And that means that as it relates to gender, as it relates to race, as ethnicity, age, educational background, military background, communication styles, it means many more things than what people think it does. And so ensuring that we are having workplaces where people are embracing those differences and that we stay the course because it's needed for sure. So those are some of the things that we're continuing to hear on this side and talk about and encouraging employers to continue to do the right thing as it relates to their workforce and to be sure to continue to transform as much as possible because our demographics are continuing to change and we want our workplaces to be able to mirror that as well.
And at the beginning of when we started talking, you listed out many benefits of, trying to achieve this. What would you say, or what would you advise leaders who are unsure of how to start? They want to do the right thing. They just don't know what to do first. What would you say are those first few steps if someone's new to this journey?
Yeah, I say definitely. It is definitely. We like to say on this side, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So, I always say again, it's really to start to have conversations internally to understand more about employees and what are they experiencing, what might they want to see done differently. But it's starting internally and just having those conversations with employees, and from there to see again based on the data what you're hearing from employees is to okay, we might need to have some training around awareness and understanding so people understand what is bias, what are microaggressions, what does it mean to be an inclusive leader during these times. And so really it's starting there, having some conversations internally, and then based on that information is to consider those next steps, whether it's training or whether it's like, hey, we need to reach out to have someone come in and help us to formulate a strategy or to survey our employees more formally, or to look at what do we need to do over the next 3 months, 6 months and beyond to ensure that we are taking into account those voices from the employees and what they want to see done differently for sure. So those are things that I would recommend is just to start internally and start to have the conversations, leverage your HR teams, or if you have employees who have been raising their hand saying, hey, I want to, this is important. I want to, want the company to start thinking about DEI and I'm happy to start the charge for it. So those are things to consider for sure. But if there's an internal HR leader or team, is definitely to see how they can help to have start the conversation.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great way to end the show too, with that piece of advice. Arquella, thank you so much for being on the podcast. For our listeners, of course, we'll link up some Arquella's the website, so you can learn more about her and their good work, and some of the articles also that she has contributed as well. Arquella, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you, Amanda. This was great. Thanks again.